Manly Hall official, is glad to produce, publish and offer. Concentration. Concentration is the key to omnipotence, and one who is capable of concentrating his or her mind to a point wherein he becomes able to eliminate life, death, and eternity, maintaining only one ideal, one point, or one nucleons of attention. Such a one is capable of ruling the earth and overturning the entire plan of civilization. Concentration is the most badly needed factor of the new civilization. The inability to concentrate and the eternal entrance of outside descending factors into the radius of mentality forms the basis of failure and is the greatest thing that stands between the student of nature's mysteries and the attainment of his divine achievement. Without concentration of effort and consecration of life to the ideal, whether material, intellectual, or spiritual, success is impossible in any marked degree. The wandering mind is the curse of our age. It wants to attain a certain end, but has not the courage to exclude other things for the attainment of that end. It has not strength to go against the tide or to balk at its own lower nature. Wishing to attain but without the courage of that wish, the average soul drifts through life, dreaming of success but attaining only failure. Individuals must have a point, an aim, and an ideal. Those who are successful are the ones who sacrifice everything, life itself if necessary, to the attainment of that ideal, in spite of opposition and the ever-present human weakness, to live only to attain that ideal to the exclusion of all else. The reward of this mental aim and determination is attainment. It is the secret of commercial success, it is the secret of the scientist and philosopher, and it is also the secret of the power of the world savior. The accomplishment of the end justifies the use of every honest, conscientious means. It does not justify ill even to produce good, but it does require the complete cooperation of the faculties of the individual. 50% efficiency is usually sufficient in the business world and is in fact all the employer expects. He expects the office boy to fumble the papers, with his mind on the baseball game, for he lives in just such a world himself. He comes to business in the morning on Monday, and all that day he sees pictures of golf links before his eyes. He wakes up with a start to sign a paper, while his mind is tuning in his radio for Havana. This is the way the business world is run usually. Here and there arises one, an expert, who climbs, within a few short years, over the heads of older and apparently wiser men and becomes the marvel of his generation. People wonder how he accomplishes it. The answer, invariably, is through concentration and consecration. You cannot have your mentality divided between pleasure and labor, between self and service, between your own desire and the needs of the multitudes, and succeed. You must choose one, adhere to it, struggle for the attainment of it, with vigilance as your watchword and labor as the passkey. The result is success, and in this old world nothing succeeds like success. This is especially true among those who take the path of occultism and consecrate their lives to an ideal. If you're enjoying this video and finding value in the content, we kindly ask you to take a moment to subscribe to the channel. A large portion of our listeners and viewers haven't subscribed yet, and by doing so, you'll help us grow and continue bringing you more high-quality audiobooks. Your support means a lot to us, and it's just one click away. So, Go ahead and hit that subscribe button to stay connected and never miss out on our latest releases. Few will understand this ideal, few will appreciate the consecration, and still fewer will recognize the end to be attained. But, in spite of this, the student of life's mysteries will never succeed in solving them until he gives himself, his life, and the labors of his hand, to the one end. He may lose much, but the thing that slumps off is the thing which is impermanent, unreal, and unnecessary. Man's needs are few, but his requirements are eternally multiplying, and he must learn to sacrifice his desires to the end which he has consecrated himself to. He is usually prepared and willing to make sacrifices, but there are usually one or two things which he does not care to sacrifice but feels confident that he shall attain without those things. In this he is wrong, but usually does not discover the fact until his hair is gray with age and his heart is broken with suffering. Whatever your walk of life, whatever your attitude towards life, remember that it is a game which requires the complete attention of the player. Like the game of chess, with its many moves and turnings, if your mind is once taken from it, your opponent will win. Failure is the opponent of time, and a cunning player at the game of life realizes that failure is the result of inattention, the result of lack of confidence in self, the result of a lack of adjustment to a plan in which the individual, as a compound unit, should cooperate completely and entirely to the end which the mentality and soul has decided should govern life. When our hands work against each other, we are as a house divided and must fall. When our lives are split between our whim and our duties, we are a house divided and cannot stand. Concentration is the answer to the problem. One-pointedness of desire will succeed regardless of the thing which is the aim of life. It is equally the means of success for the merchant, the mechanic, and the seer. The successes of life are those who have sacrificed everything for that success, while the failures of life are those who have failed to cooperate with themselves. There are many things each one of us wants to do. We want to be Napoleons, we want to be Edisons, we want to achieve the height of public prominence in politics or religion. Every happiness that the world demonstrates we would have our share of. One minute we gaze at the lofty pinnacles upon which stand the forms of the immortals, and we wish we stood there also. In the same glance we see the simple happiness and peace of the little cottage, the laughing children, the old hearthstone, and long to be there too for our share in the joys of simple things. We see the apparent joy of riches, we see the plaudits of power. Each point of the compass carries an attraction which we long to possess. And the youth of today, standing at the parting of the ways, wishes all the joy and none of the sorrow, all the laurels and none of the endeavor. One day he wishes to be great, the next day he gives himself to selfishness and greed. In other words, he is unconsecrated and without concentration. The sage, standing at the parting of the ways, makes his life decision and swears by all that is holy within him and all that he hopes to be that he will remain firm upon that decision, and if he is too weak to reach the end, you will find him lying somewhere on the path, with his eyes to the front and the same resolve in his soul, even though he could not attain the end. He chose with his eyes open and lived and died upon the strength of that choice. When he chose to walk the path of the world's Savior, of the servant of men, he closed his eyes to the path of power, he closed his eyes to the beckoning fingers of greed, he turned, mayhap with a sigh, from the hearthstone and the children's faces. All these he wanted, but he knew that he could but succeed in one, and so, Strong in his decision, he turned his back upon things he wanted, things he thought he needed, and took the trail that led to the highest that his soul conceived of. Many times again he saw the gloomy shadow of power beckoning to him, promising him all things. Many times again he heard the laughter of children's voices and saw in dream and vision the things which he left behind. Many times he was tempted to turn back. Many times he half believed he could accomplish all, could have them all, but in his soul he knew that no human being was great enough to span them all. So he left them all, to the furtherance of his objective, the thing he had sworn to do. This is the story of the great capitalists, the great scientists, the world-famed philosophers, and the gods themselves. Surrounded by naggings and hampering, criticized and deluged with abuses, tempted upon every turn to forsake a way that shows no progress, they remain true to themselves, and now the world bows humbly at their feet. The price of power is sacrifice, the price of gold is sacrifice, the price of philosophy is sacrifice, the price of mastery is sacrifice, the sacrifice of all else to the attainment of one end. And consecration is that obligation taken to the soul by the soul that it shall attain one fixed, determined and a special end, and concentration is that attitude of consciousness in which the bodies, mental, emotional and physical, unite under the direction of the spirit to the accomplishment of that one fixed and a special end. In this modern age, superstitions have left us, only to slink like red-eyed eyes in the gloom which borders the campfire of intelligence. To be sure, there are a few voodoo doctors left, and I guess our psychologists will be with us always, but thinking people, illuminated by the dazzling brilliancy of Christianity and modern science, pooh-pooh the idea of witches on broomsticks and ghosts that walk at night. Of course you all know about King Tut, the young Egyptian pharaoh whose body has been disturbed after thousands of years of rest, and most of you have heard about the curse of King Tut and that singular, shall we say, coincidence of the death of Lord Caravan, who was the first to open the tomb. Most of you have laughed around your firesides over the fact that anybody should for a moment suppose that an Egyptian heathen could do cursing more effectively than a Los Angeles taxi driver. But just after this story got out about King Tut's curse, there began to flood into the museums of the various countries a miscellany of Egyptian relics. Smith, Brown, and Jones sent in scarabs their uncles had got in Egypt, fake mummies, and chips of the Sphinx, claiming that they did not care to have such articles in their possession. Of course, this does not demonstrate any superstition or anything like that. It just proves that while people today do not put any faith in those things, they just believe in taking precautions, that's all. The year of hard luck. Another popular superstition that still thrives amidst all our intelligence is that ghastly ghoul, election year. One of the advantages of democratic government seems to be that it goes into convulsions every 4 years. Farmer Smith says, things are tightening up for election. The president of the Real Estate League says, things are tightening up for election. When we ask why this, that, and the other thing has gone wrong, why we cannot sell our fresh strawberries for more than half price, etc., the buyer for the stranded strawberry syndicate winks one eye and whispers, election year, things are getting tight. Bootleg, flypaper, and artificial linoleum are getting higher every day but will go down after election year, we understand. The problem before the House of the Unrepresented is, How much is it going to cost you and I to find out which one of the political parties is going to have the pleasure, privilege, and opportunity to live off of us for the next 4 years? Who is going to misrepresent us in Congress? Who is going to sleep in the Senate chair this year? It's a great problem, and while it doesn't mean anything to hardly any of us who gets in, I guess we will have to be patient while things tighten up for election. Progressiveness in the Far East. Most of you have heard of Java, noted for its coffee, its mosquitoes, and for the fact that it is the most densely populated area on the face of the earth. Leaving Batavia, which is the seat of the Dutch government there, one can travel 300 miles by a dusty, hopeless train over a roadbed which must have been built by the Corduroy brothers, to the little town of Jakarta, which exists as a sort of a tumor on the railroad track. Stopping at the main hotel, one passes into the dining room for dinner. 3 native musicians answer, playing on nondescript instruments unlisted in any musical catalog, appeared, seated themselves, tuned up their equipment, and then burst forth into that well-known classic "Yes, we have no bananas." There was silence for about half a minute, then from among the Americans there burst a howl of laughter and an applause which nearly drowned the effort of the Javanese. Over 15,000 miles away, in the heart of a practically unopened country, this reception would have brought tears to the eyes on an optician's window. There is no use talking, the heathens are progressive. Question and answer. Does justice work through evolution or reincarnation? How may one know when he is using the so-called divine mind? Answer: reincarnation is one phase of the law of evolution. Justice works through all of nature's laws, and whichever one is broken through, that the mistake must be made right. Is it not better at times to live out desires than to suppress them? Answer: absolutely. To be good or spiritual because you have to or afraid not to brings little real growth. The most important thing is to be truly honest with yourself and not try to hide a weakness under affirmations of spirituality. There's always the motive of our goodness to be considered, and if it is not up to the action, much of the value of said action is lost. Do you advise the ceremony of baptism for children? Answer: it is a matter for personal solution. If it is liable in any way to help, socially or otherwise, the future of the child, there is no particular harm in baptism, but until it is a ceremony in truth, a spiritual occurrence within the individual when his consciousness is raised by right living, there is no real gain. Is it right to ask the elder brothers for the wisdom of the sages? Answer: if we ask in a certain way, it is all right. The only safe and sane manner is to prove in our daily lives that we are worthy to represent them. When we do this, the wisdom of the sages will be ours without any other asking. Without this requisite, there can never come true wisdom anyhow. What is scientific thinking? Answer: scientific thinking is the power to reason in an orderly, consecutive manner without interfering with others' thoughts and not confusing your own. Answer: when his thoughts are in harmony with the divine plan. The divine is neither narrow, creed-bound, egotistical, selfish, emotional, temperamental or harsh in its thoughts, and if we are living the life that the divine points out, then we will use or be attuned to the divine mind. Is mind separate creation or evolved from animal creation? Answer: all kingdoms of life are the results of evolution, each having evolved from the one below it. Man is no exception to the rest of creation. Can all the laws of inheritance be overcome in one life? Answer: yes, they can be overcome as soon as we realize that we have inherited nothing but the opportunity for the fulfillment of causations we ourselves have set in motion. Will we be promoted to higher forms of life? Answer: when we have graduated from this. We will not become truly human until the end of this earth period, at which time, if we are good and faithful servants, we will be given greater opportunity for hard work. If God knows that sparrows fall, why is He too busy to help us? Answer: the main reason why God does not help us more is because God, being the individualized spark of life within ourselves, is not helping itself as it should. The Lord helps those who help themselves. How can a person best improve his moral recollection? Answer: all faculties are developed through exercise. If the memory is poor, use it and it will improve. If you are seeking for spiritual remembrance, develop spirituality by proper living and thinking and the newly exercised organization of mind. The Terror Tree. Few have walked upon the Scottish moorlands at night, especially such a night as the one that we describe. A thin, drizzly rain was falling and the ground underfoot was sagged and muddy. A wind howled among broken rocks and sent the sheets of water swirling in a dozen directions, driving the raindrops against your face like bullets. Now and then a sharp flash of lightning streaked through the sky and lit the moorland with a strange, lurid, electrical light. One of these flashes showed in relief against the bluish radiance of the heavens an old ruined building which raised gaunt, windowless turrets to the sky. It was known in the countryside as a haunted place where ghouls walked in the darkness of the night and specter shades of days gone by carried ghost lanterns through the passageways. None lived there for any good, but it was the abode of thieves and vagabonds and outcasts of society. Fiendish crimes had been committed beneath the shadow of its ivy-covered keep. Wanderers upon the moor of Ten strayed there to return no more, and the peoples of the town whispered that their bones lay rotting somewhere amid the gray shadows of the haunted castle. On the night when our story opens, a light was seen in one window of the old building, and had you been closer you would have seen a figure, enveloped in the folds of a great black cape, carrying in its arms a bundle, creep silently down the old moss-covered stairs, swinging a battered lantern in his hand. On his face was a look of horror, yet grim determination, and the faint glow of the lantern made his strong, aquiline features resemble more than anything else the grinning skull of some old Capuchin monk, long draped in sable cowl, in the catacombs of Rome. Out into the dark and drear of the storm-swept moorland the figure stole. Just as the man descended the steps and crossed the battered drawbridge, which had once spanned the moat now dry, he stopped for a second and listened. From somewhere in the midst of the gloomy castle a cry sounded, a long, broken wail that rose and fell, and at last died out in a burst of hysterical laughter. The man's face grew pale as death, but shaking off with a terrible effort the spell that the cry had brought upon him, he picked up a spade that lay on the ground by the drawbridge end and slunk like a shadow into the night, his tiny lantern casting gloomy shadows on the ground around him and bringing into strong relief the burden that he carried. Some 300 feet he walked in the mud of the moorland and then came to a place by the roadside where, on the side of a hummock of reddish dirt, a dwarf tree, with gnarled branches and spreading roots, stood firm in spite of the blasts of the storm. gazing about him as though he expected to find sinister faces gleam at him from the shadows. The man in the cape lay down his burden, and, picking up the spade, started digging frantically in the muddy ooze of the moorland. The minutes passed rapidly by. Convulsively and nervously the weird figure turned the sod and piled the slimy ooze about him as he furled from the ground a shallow trough some 3 feet long and a foot or 2 in width. He desired, it seemed, that the hole should be deep, for even as the lightning flashed about him he steadily plied the spade. Shuddering, cringing, terrified even by the voice of the wind, the wretched man labored frenziedly. As fast as the hole was dug it filled with water, and the task was an arduous one, but in some 20 minutes it was accomplished, and with a sigh the cloaked figure stuck the spade in the ground and turned to the bundle wrapped in a dark cloth that lay beside him. Glancing furtively around that none might see, he dropped his burden, with a slight splash, into the water that already half filled the opening, and then with frenzied haste he hacked the mud and ooze to fill the hole. In half an hour it was done, this thing he had come to do. With a last look around, the strange figure turned from the tree with its gnarled branches and picked his way back through the mud and slime to the gates of the haunted castle. Here everything was quiet and silent. The cloaked figure threw the spade into the moat where it clanked upon the dry stones at the bottom, and then crept back into the passageway where the light of his lantern sent sparkling-eyed lizards and croaking frogs into the distant corners. Up and up he wound along the circular staircase that led to the keep. At last, reaching the top of this ancient tower, he stopped before a half-closed door. For a moment he swayed undecided and leaned back against the cold stones, his face the picture of agony. Then, steeling himself, as it were, for a mighty shock, he turned the lantern low and, allowing the cape to fall from his shoulders, pressed open the door, which creaked dismally on rusty hinges, and with a half-sob passed into the darkened room. Many months passed. It was sunshine on the moorland, and the dismal barrenness of it seemed even greater as its expansion could be better viewed. Everywhere rough, broken rocks and desert land, and here and there a broken stone or fallen pillar of granite that showed where the Druids of old had built their temples to the god of the winds. Across the moorland a solitary figure was walking. It was the man who had crept from the enchanted tower on that dark night. Each day he came. None knew why, none could guess the reason, but day after day he wandered across the moorland to a little mound of reddish dust that raised itself from the rolling land and from whose crest grew a gnarled tree, its shapeless limbs seeming twisted by the agony of the inferno. For days this man had never smiled, and all knew a great weight was upon his soul. But none knew what it was, none knew why. In a few short days, a man in the prime of life became a broken wreck, hopeless and lifeless, nursing in his soul a secret sorrow. At last he reached the little mound where the tree grew, and before him rose the spectral shape, the castle of phantoms. He fell on his knees beside the dwarf tree. There was silence for a moment, then a great sigh broke from his lips, his shoulders heaved, and a once strong man shed tears of bitter anguish and repentance. He raised his eyes to the heavens, but all he could see was the gloomy torrent of the haunted castle. He turned his eyes to the earth, but all he saw there was the heap of reddish dirt, and at last he turned his eyes upon the tree. For a few seconds he gazed at it, and then, with a scream of mortal agony, he raised his hands before his face and, half running, half falling, fled away. "No, no, he screamed. "Not that." After a few seconds he gained courage and returned again, shaking as with the palsy, and gazed fascinated at the tree, which seemed to hypnotize him and from which he could not turn his eyes. He realized that the tree had changed its shape. It was no longer the bush he had visited so many times before. For many weeks he had noticed the slow change, and now he realized what it meant. The limbs of the tree were becoming like human arms, its branches were fingers stretching out to him, and its gnarled surface was taking the shape of a human body. With a moan, he recognized his sin in the form of the tree. Tottering and broken, his eyes wild and his steps unsteady, the strong man returned, a slave to his own sin. Yet day by day he had to come there, fascinated. Each time he gazed upon the branches of the tree he realized with unutterable agony that it was becoming every day more like the thing he had buried. The people in the village grew frightened at the wild-eyed man who stalked like one marching to his doom through the streets each day. None knew why he went out into the moorland, and those who followed him could not understand why any man should lie weeping at the foot of a tree. They could not understand what he knew. From the twisted bark of that dwarfed shrub he could see a face, and the stunted arms, leafless and dead-looking, reached out and beckoned to him. The months passed. At last it grew more than human soul could endure this mystery of the tree that came to life. His crime was ever before his eyes, and at last this man decided that if the crime once done was not completed, it must be finished now. It was another dark and stormy night upon the moorland. Again the wind howled through the parapets of that haunted castle as it did on the night when first the stranger with his lantern crept down its moss-grown passageways. Again the tiny light shone upon the moorland. Again the figure with its black cape struggled along, battered by the elements and drenched by the pouring rain. Again that expression of terror, again a great determination, and this time the stranger carried in his hand an axe. He was determined to end forever the mad dream by chopping down the enchanted tree that in his demented mind was the one witness to his crime. He reached again the knoll of reddish dirt and in spite of himself could not help but stop to gaze at the little tree whose form each day grew more like the child he had buried at its roots. He tried to pray, but words would not come, and the silence of the moorland night was only broken by the distant baying of a mighty dog, perchance the howl of a wolf. Raising the axe, the man hesitated. For a second, and then, with a muttered word, he brought it down with all his strength upon the trunk of the knotted tree. For an instant the trunk swayed, and to the half-demented man it seemed that its branches twisted themselves in agony. Quickly the man drew out the axe to bring it down again and complete the labor. But as he drew it from the tree he shrank back with a stifled scream, for down the side of the trunk, from the place where the axe had cut, a thin stream of blood was trickling. For an instant he waited, and then something broke within himself. The silence of the moorland was broken by a peal of demoniacal laughter. Casting a side lamp and axe, the strange figure dashed, howling and screaming, out into the darkness. This is the story of the terror tree. None other knows why the axe was laid to its roots. None other saw what the stranger saw that night on the moorland. But of him no trace was ever found, and it is surmised that, stumbling demented across the boggy wastes, he was swallowed up by the mires and quicksands of the moor. 10 Nature's Little Mysteries. Introducing 2 of our leading families. They have led the social attitudes of man since prehistoric times. Side by side, one mounted on his Arabian Megatherium, and the other prancing alongside on his thoroughbred dinosaur, they crossed the barren wastes of the antediluvian world. One noble family baptized Methuselah, while a scion of the other house broke the first bottle of champagne over the prow of the Arkansas. When Troy was falling, it was one of the noble house of Stubblefield that first reached the gates, while William the Conqueror leaned his arm on a field marshal of the house of Marblehead when he first stubbed his toe on British soil. The captain of Christopher Columbus' ship was undoubtedly a Stubblefield, while it is now avowed that the man who put his cape in front of Queen Elizabeth was not Sir Walter Raleigh at all, but His Excellency Lord Phidias Marblehead, Knight of the Royal Splash. Coming down into more modern times, we want to trace the heraldic arms of these two noble families through the history of our own beautiful land. In the family album, with its solid Morocco cover and gilt edge, we find the modern lineage of these ancient and honored families. First of all, you must know the Carolina Stubblefields. They came over in the early days and settled on a beautiful plantation where old Lord Josiah Stubblefield breathed his last, leaving behind him his charming daughter, most beautiful debutante of the year of grace. She is the first of that royal house that met a Marblehead and entwined the crest of noble ancestry around a single stem. Lady Penelope Cassandra Stubblefield wed in the 24th year of her life to Sowster Huddlestone Marblehead, the last of a long and illustrious line of earls, dukes, lords and whatnots who had blazoned their crests in the chivalry of every land. From that time onward the Marblehead family blossomed forth, producing for this new and wonderful land many generals, admirals, learned lawyers and honest doctors who always rose head and shoulders above the surrounding families and dignitaries of our day. The town of Brandywine, where George Washington fought his famous battle, is said to be named after the besetting weakness of the House of Marblehead. The family album shows the following direct lineal descendants of this tremendously important human. The first that we find is little Nicodemus Marblehead, the beloved son of Lady Penelope Stubblefield and Sowster Marblehead. Little Nicodemus was reared with all the love and care that could be bestowed upon him by his doting parents. In later life we find him Brigadier General Marblehead, who was showered with appointments and promotions because of his unusual bravery and great gallantry. He dazzled single-handed into the ranks of redcoats at Yorktown. Like all of the true descendants of this noble family, he was greatly desired by the fair sex, and in the 36th year of his life took unto himself a wife, Mehetabel Featherstonehaugh, who was a faithful and dutiful wife until the Lord did them part. Two charming children graced this marriage, Eleazar and Silesius Marblehead. Dear little Eleazar was called away while still young, and the continuation of this noble family depended upon Silesius. He arose nobly to the occasion, and when laid to rest with his fathers was known as Rear Admiral Silesius J. Marblehead, one of the most honored, respected, and revered of our unknown naval heroes. Silesius went far in search of a mate and chose as his helpmeet Griselda Pettingill of the famous Berkshire Pettingills from Clubstone on the Spoke. She looked up to him for many years and finally down at him when he was laid to rest, leaving behind a mourning community, a bereaved wife and 9 dear little children. These went their respective ways, each arriving at due distinction and fame, our interest being in the elder son, the Right Honorable Marmaduke Marblehead, who rose high in our legal and literary circles as a master intellect. He was a writer of many books, including a monstrous history of the Marblehead family. It was he who established the connection between the Marbleheads of American and the Carrara Marbleheads of Italy. He also came to the conclusion that the name marble as applied to rocks and stones arrived as the result of their being named after the solid foundation of his family by their earliest progenitor, the Very Honorable Mr. Adam Marblehead. When Marmaduke died, they had the most stately funeral ever witnessed, and everyone hoped that his son Bartholomew Peddleford Marblehead would be worthy to wear the family crest, carried unspotted and unstained since the Ark was a wee little rowboat. Bartholomew was a chip off the old block hut, chose a life on the rolling waves, so his doting father, on his 25th birthday, presented him with a solid gold watch and $200, telling him to go forth in search of fame and fortune. Bartholomew sailed the 17 seas, had many adventures with pirates, was wrecked on an island in the South Pacific, learned to talk Canibulese, and after many years returned, loaded with spoils, including a South American wife, to the famous home of the Marbleheads. His vast treasures which he had recovered from pirates, his seagoing yarns and a wooden leg fascinated the community, and wherever he stumped on his timber toe there was always a crowd that followed, proclaiming and heralding the dignity of the House of Marblehead. The next generation shows the infection of Spanish blood. Ramon Pedro Costello Marblehead and sweet little Juanita Consuelo Marblehead graced this union as two beautiful little dusky daisies from the shores of the Amazon. At last, after long wandering, Bartholomew sailed out where no man returneth, and the fate of the family hung upon Ramon. Said Ramon demonstrated his Castilian blood by becoming a great musician. Thus he brought new laurels to hang upon the family shrine, and all of the aunts and uncles who had looked with doubt upon this international combine said that he showed the true spirit of the Stubblefield Marbleheads, direct descendants of Augustus Caesar Marblehead. Ramon united his family crest with the original Vermont whiffletrees when he married the charming and graceful Desmeralda. The joy of their home was broken by the Civil War, from which Ramon returned, bearing the position of adjutant and decorated for personal bravery and valor. He was an invalid for the rest of his life from the hardships that he had passed through, and came to an untimely grave, leaving the duty of upholding his family name to the only begotten Alcibiades Stu Piffle Marblehead, whose life was one of struggle against financial reverses and an unpronounceable name. Rising with the true spirit of the Marbleheads, he followed the directions of his ancient family, and, by using his head, broke down the barrier between them and fortune. Alcibiades was the first of the Marblehead millionaires, and his name will always be remembered in our great financial centers. In order to strengthen the lineage, he united with Jerusha Snodgrass, a charming New York heiress, who, however, was not faithful unto Alcibiades but who broke his home and heart, sending him to an early grave. Alcibiades left only one child, Pellaud Marblehead, the shortest name in 19 generations. Pellaud was reared by his uncle Hiram and Aunt Melinda until his 21st year, when he stepped into the empty shoes of the noble house of Marblehead and doubled the family fortune. The years passed and old Pellaud Marblehead passed away, and his eldest son, true to the family honor, married Adeline Hapgood, who, by the way, is a direct descendant of the Hapgood branch of the Kildows. The Kildaws are an offshoot of the Rockyfords, and of course you know all about them. The Rockyfords came from the union of Gerustra Marblehead with the Rockyford branch of the original Stubblefields. In English this means that, after long wandering upon the face of the earth, these two illustrious families have met again. On one side is a stream of admirals, generals, and courageous diplomats who have for hundreds of years been our bravest and noblest. On the other side are 24 generations of noble ladies, gallant courtiers, musicians, artists, and philosophers. Today there is rising up in the world the last of this noble line, and we will introduce to you the flower of the Marbleheads, the hope and pride of the Stubblefields, young Percival Algernon Marblehead. We draw aside the curtains and expose him to your mental view. Percy is just getting ready to go out for the evening with a few friends for a late roadhouse party. Percy is about 5'2", has falling arches and bowed legs, while his evening clothes look as though they were draped over an ant. His chest slumps in, his arms hang as though he did not need them, he has a long neck, a receding chin, a nose that droops centrally, and a hypothetical forehead. His hair is smooth with brilliantine, and he caresses a monocle with one eye. The valet opens the door and Percy coughs, for his sensitive constitution catches cold with the slightest draft. "Did you call, sir?" asks the valet. "Goodness gracious, no," answer Percy, spraying perfume over his waistcoat. "Is the car ready?" "Yes, sir." "Oh, do you know I feel perfectly morose," exclaims Percy as he looks himself over carefully in the mirror. "The governor's cut down my allowance. You know I was frightened to death today. Someone laughed at me while I was out on the street, and I nearly fainted." Taking his tall silk hat and settling it on his ears, the last hope of the House of Marblehead trips gracefully from the room with all the dignity that 92 pounds and spinal curvature can produce. "Say ta-ta to the folks for me," he called as he faded away. "I may not get home tonight." The door closes on this scene, and one of life's little mysteries has been enacted before you. This emaciated anemic, this dissipated, subhuman, unknown quantity is the direct descendant of 18 or 20 generations or noble sires and grandsires. The blood of hero, poet, and sage is in the family of Marblehead, and behold, the product. How many times in life we find this? It is one of those proofs eternally confronting us of the fallacy of the law of heredity. A pigeon-chested, stoop-shouldered ghost is all that their lives today to show the gallant ancestry, the tremendous struggle of many a great and noble family, all its value and worth and buried ancestry, and its living examples, all symbolical of dissipation and failure. Copyright 2025 by Manly Hall Official. Thank you for listening. Please consider to subscribe, like, and share to help the channel growth, new videos on a daily basis.